Hey, welcome to the Helicopter Podcast. I'm your host, Jon Gray. Yes, sir, I have taken over the Helicopter Podcast. I'm the host of the Hangar Z Podcast, but I'm here to celebrate the 50th episode release of the Helicopter Podcast with my friend Halsey Schider. How you doing, Halsey?
I am doing good. John, thank you for stealing my podcast for the day. I couldn't ask for a better guest host. So thank you for playing this game with me because I think it's going to be fun.
Yeah, for sure. We went to a conference this summer. Airborne Law Enforcement has a conference and it's all over the place, but this year is in Orlando. And MD Helicopters came and did a podcast takeover of our stuff. I thought it was really fun. So when I got the opportunity to do the Helicopter Podcast takeover, I'm like, oh yeah, this is gonna be awesome.
Yep, I think this will hopefully be like the first of many takeovers on all of our different channels with the Vertical Helicast.
Yeah, that's been really cool with Vertical Helicast. You know, the opportunity we get to collaborate with each other, share stories and ideas, and troubleshoot and just the whole platform by itself. What we're getting access to through Vertical and Vertical Helicast is absolutely amazing. I just listened to the episode you released with Robinson, and that was awesome. Well done there.
It's cool, right? Yeah. David. David's an impressive guy. It's intimidating, from the podcast perspective. I don't know if you ever kind of feel this way, but I would say the coolest thing about the podcast is that I get to interview really awesome people, including guys like David. And even now that I'm hitting episode 50, which I'm super excited about, I still get like nervous with kind of everyone, and then maybe even a little extra nervous when it's like someone like that because, engineering background, super smart, like you have to kind of be able to stand toe to toe and have intelligible conversations with these guys and gals. And it's a little daunting. And so David was great. What I loved about David is he is so smart, but he like came down to kind of my level a little bit. And I think by and large, that level is actually kind of like the pilot level of being able to understand, right? Because from my pilot perspective, I don't fully understand what is actually making the helicopter fly, right?
It's all magic.
And so to be able, PFM, pure freaking magic. So to be able to like have him explain it in a term that I understood, I think was really beneficial, not just for me, but my audience as well. Not that my audience probably can't interpret something at a higher level, but at least for my pilot kind of degree of knowledge, I thought that David did a great job. So,
yeah, absolutely.
I really, and again, that's, that relationship was, curated through, Vertical Helicast. And so that's what I love about the Helicast. And it's because of the listeners. You guys listen, you guys engage. And because I get the engagement, I got to join the Helicast platform, and joining that platform has given me access. So I'm just so excited about that.
Yeah, you brought up something that's really interesting I'd like to touch on. I do find myself getting a little nervous as well when you start talking to a guest maybe you haven't talked to very much in the past, but then you start the conversation and you realize, we're just brothers and sisters in aviation, and everyone has this common passion and desire to talk about aviation. That's what I love about our community. It's just it's a cool thing. And I feel like, midway through the conversation, you look down, you're like, holy cow, it's been an hour,
I know.
And it feels like you're just in the hangar talking about, the last flight or, whatever the problem of the world that you're solving that day is. But it's really fun. But speaking on that, the Hangar Z podcast, we would like to do a couple things. And one of those is the hot seat. So to celebrate the 50th anniversary, I'm sorry, the 50th episode, we're going to put you in the hot seat. And this is just a little icebreaker exercise that we like to go through. And usually it's pretty random questions. The most random question, it's probably my favorite question that's asked. And Jeff, my co-host, Jeff Rakovich, he asked this question. And the question is, for number one, is a hot dog a sandwich?
Is a hot dog a sandwich? No.
So there's an argument that can be made because it's two pieces of bread with a meat in between, and maybe some condiments spread in there.
But I think for me, the distinguishing factor is the hinge, that the bread is connected.
Okay.
But then I guess that could make, like at Subway, they don't always fully cut through. So does that make a Subway sandwich a hot dog?
That's a good reversal in the question.
Yeah, that is a good one. I'm sticking to it. A hot dog's a hot dog, and a sandwich is a sandwich.
Okay. Yeah, it's very debatable, and it's a divisive question, right? Because there's multiple points of views, and there's different ways you can look at it. A similar question, and we don't have to answer it, but is cereal just cold soup? It's like those random questions are really fun to dig through.
It's true. I think cereal is kind of cold soup.
Kind of on the more serious side, I like to ask questions that gives me a little bit of insight into people's backgrounds and the things they've done. So the next 2 questions are along those lines. They're just fun questions to kind of, again, get some insight as to who you are. Looking back over your career, whether it was as a teenager, in the first job you ever had, or up to today, what would you consider the worst job that you ever had is?
The worst job? I mean, I don't want to cop out on this, but I don't think I've necessarily had like a worst job experience. I've been really fortunate. My very first job was landscaping. I started a landscaping business at age 12 or 13 with my buddy Garrett. And we actually became fairly like busy within our little neighborhood to the point where we invested. We bought a little ride-on mower with a trailer so we could easily commute back and forth. And then from that time on, honestly, all my jobs were either in aviation, working line service, or pizza, making pizza. And so I think if I would have to pick my worst job, and I don't want to say the name of the place, but there was a pizza shop. It wasn't Pizza Bella. So if my buddy Jeff is listening, who's a good friend of mine to this day, and he used to own Pizza Bella, it's not Pizza Bella. It's another pizza shop that I worked at. And it was family owned, and there was just a lot of drama. And that was kind of annoying. So I think that's maybe kind of my worst working experience. And I was also at that time only working there to make ends meet as a flight instructor. I wasn't making enough money teaching people how to fly helicopters. Go figure.
Gosh.
And so in order to pay my rent, pay my other bills, pay my student loan, which was due the second that I stopped flight training, I had to carry that job. So I think that was kind of just a negative time a little bit, but yeah. I would say that.
Interesting sidebar. So being that pizza's kind of the topic of conversation here, another divisive question that goes along with
pineapple is all day.
Okay, you knew what I was going to ask. So you roll with the pineapple pizza?
Oh, 100%. I am pineapple for president. I love pineapple, and I love it on pizza.
All right.
In fact, my pizza making skills still exist to this day, and I'm pretty good at throwing dough. So we made pizza this on Sunday for my parents, and I make a barbecue chicken pizza. It has a barbecue. We like to use Salt Lick. Salt Lick's a super cool Texas-based barbecue joint. They have 2 locations. The location that we went to is outside of Austin, and one of the cool, fun helicopter facts is they have 2 helicopter landing spots. So anytime I was trying to impress a client or do something fun, we would fly them to the Salt Lick.
That's cool.
And one of their sauces is kind of like a mustard base. So I would do a mustard based pizza sauce almost with their sauce, chicken, mozzarella cheese, onion, pimentos, and the key ingredient, pineapple.
See, it's a room divided here because I say pineapple belongs in the trash. But I will say,
gosh,
I talked to some Nick, the developer of Icarus. He was a pizza guy too, and he said the key ingredient or the key way to make pineapple pizza is to make sure the pineapple is actually dry. A lot of times, folks will pull the pineapple out of the sauce, whatever the sauce is. Another reason why it doesn't belong on pizza, and just put it on there wet. He's like, you got to let that dry and make sure that doesn't infect the rest of the pizza. You got
to let it dry. That's true. When I worked at Pizza Bella, which was my first pizza experience, and that was like everything was pretty much done in-house, and there were some things that were canned, and the things that like pineapple was canned. And we'd take it out, we'd have to strain it, dry it. So that guy's right. That's what's his name? Nick?
Yeah, Nick. Yeah,
and that's Icarus. That's the view limiting device, right?
Yeah, you talk about technology and innovation and how it's changing our industry, especially for the folks doing flight instruction. Man, what a great tool that he's come up with. Because you think about foggles when you're in flight training, it's, to me, it was one of the check the box type things, you know, like you just had to do it. And I couldn't really say that there was a direct benefit that I felt like I got from it. Although, I mean, it forces you to focus on the instruments, but I just remember feeling dizzy, you know, looking through those things. That's all I remember. So.
Yeah. Foggles are like, you know, it's like they do as good as you expect them to be able to do. The one thing that I liked doing when I did my instrument training was I opted to do most of my instrument training at night. So I would have the foggles on and have the extra benefit of it being really dark. And so it really made me actually feel like I was kind of immersed in this, you know, IFR environment, you know, the best that you can with foggles. But yeah, that's cool. I'm not actually super familiar with the Icarus device. Obviously, I've heard about it. But I don't know enough to speak on it, to be honest. So it'd be awesome. You should connect me with that guy and love to have him on the show.
For sure. It's a really interesting conversation. And, you know, just to stretch the conversation a tiny bit, one of the things I like about it from a training perspective is the startle factor. You know, when you're a student and you're going to do your instrument training portion, like, okay, put the foggles on. Well, in your mind, you know what you're doing now, right? Like, it's just a process now. Whereas if you're flying along and you've got the Icarus device on, your instructor sitting next to you can change conditions instantly on you. So you've got to deal with it as it comes, and it's startling, you know? So I think you kind of condition yourself as a pilot to respond to those, you know, startle effect type things, which is great. You can't really create those training situations outside of having devices like that. So I like that a lot.
Yeah, no, that's super cool. You know, and typically in IMC, specifically inadvertent IMC, you know, things can happen really fast, you know. Weather can change dramatically. Things can happen fast. And I think for our VFR pilots that are listening out there that maybe don't see the importance of maybe having an instrument certificate, I would highly recommend it just for the fact of inadvertent IMC. When I worked at my last air medical job, VFR program. We only flew VFR helicopters. We had autopilot. We had partial glass cockpit. We had nice equipment, and we had to do quarterly training for inadvertent IMC. And I'm really glad that we were doing that because there was times where the weather would change, you know, and I never punched in, but I think as a company, they would have, you know, 6 to 10 inadvertent IMC events every single year. And if you're not ready for that or prepared, or kind of understand how you can get yourself back to safety, man, you could be in a really bad spot. So I always recommend, I just had a conversation with someone recently. One of the positive consequences of the podcast is a lot of people reach out and ask me kind of advice on, should I do this? Should I do that? And a common question is like, hey, should I get the instrument? It just seems silly, you know? And it's like, well, first off, a lot of VFR companies require it. So yeah, you should probably get it. But not only that, you should get it and then keep it current and keep fresh, because you never know when you're going to punch into the soup, and you definitely want to feel like you're ready to go.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's pretty easy to say, I'll just avoid the clouds. And that's what everybody says until they're in the clouds. Then
until you're in it.
If you're not ready and, like you said, prepared to deal with it, then you're in a bad spot. So I 100% agree with you there. You know, as a law enforcement pilot, I never had the opportunity to get my instrument rating. And I wish I would have, because like you said, it does increase your safety factor dramatically. And aside from that, it also opens up a lot of doors for jobs. You know, if you're looking for a job, at least in HIMS, most companies require that instrument rating. So, yeah, highly recommend.
I mean, I think even getting into like the canyon requires it now. Like a lot of the tour operators, you know, they just like to see that part of your 135 check ride, or at least mine at Maverick Helicopters was inadvertent IMC scenario in Vegas, right? Like we saw clouds once a year. Yeah. You know, so
dust clouds more than anything.
Yeah, we did actually have some limited visibility days because of the dust, which was never fun.
Well, last question that I'll ask for the hot seat. And again, this question just kind of goes to get some insight as to who you are and your personality. First car, what was your first car, and did it have a name?
Oh, so is this like the first car that I paid for myself, or it's like
first car
that? Okay. Yeah. My first car was a hand-me-down from my parents. Thank you, Mom and Dad. It was a probably like a 1996 Ford Explorer. It was red, and there was no name. I did not. I'm usually in habit of naming my vehicles, but I don't think that I named that car. It didn't last long. I was in it for a short time. I don't know if my parents leased it or what it was, but I then ended up into like a 1995 4Runner, like an SR5, which I loved.
Yeah. Yeah. The 4Runners are awesome. I still see some of those era 4Runners driving around today, all souped up,
Yeah.
crawling and stuff.
Yeah. So mine wasn't like super, I was never like big into off-roading or anything. I just loved the look of it. Kind of bigger tires. It was a manual as well, which I thought was super cool. Loved driving manual. The first week after I picked it up, again, thank you to my mom and dad because they actually bought it. I was a kid, guys. All right, give me a break. Landscaping business was a little slow. First week, I got hit by a tractor trailer truck. It was making a turn into a store, and it cut it too short. I was in a turning lane, turning left, and the whole back end of the trailer smashed to the back left of my 4Runner, picked me up. And so my entire ownership of that vehicle, I had a huge dent in the back left. If producer Zach is listening, he probably remembers seeing that 4Runner at the Hillsboro airport parking lot because it was just so jacked up. It was so sad.
You think about being that age, your parents' insurance went up like crazy, having a kid on their insurance. So you didn't want to claim something if you didn't have to. And we for sure didn't have money to fix something like that.
Yeah, and I think it was kind of weird because like insurance did cover it. We made a claim, and it the body shop though was like, man, it's what they're willing to pay is not enough, And so I think my parents just kept the money. I don't know. Yeah. So I don't really know what ended up happening. It didn't get fixed. I can tell you that. And so I had that car for probably 4 or 5 years like that, and kind of a bum deal. And actually, kind of a side story of that because it's just kind of silly and unfortunate luck. So that was unfortunate luck. And then on top of it, there was an accident report that was filed, and it claimed that the trucker was 100% at fault. So I had zero fault in the situation. And the police report needed me to sign a document on the actual report. And that document got sent to my parents' house, not sent to my address where I was living in Hillsboro. And my parents didn't tell me about it, or they didn't see it. I don't really know that. I'm not throwing stones at the mom and dad here, but I never got that. And because that report didn't get signed, I ended up getting my license suspended because I got hit by a semi truck and failed to sign this one document through the DMV. And I had no idea I was suspended. I got pulled over, and that's when I found out. So that was, talk about insurance skyrocketing. That was right when I started flight instructing, and that was actually one of the reasons I had to work at that pizza shop, because my insurance was literally like $700 a month after that. I got what's called an SR22 put on my insurance policy, which carried with me for 3 years because of that. It was horrible. So, fun fact, I had my license suspended.
I like how the conversation went full circle. We even tied it back into the pizza deal.
Tied it back in, back into the pizza deal. Yeah, it's horrible. Horrible times. Good times, but horrible.
Now that we're kind of on the topic of your youth, can you talk about, where you grew up? I'm sure a lot of your listeners have heard a lot of this already, but can you talk about where you grew up and kind of how you developed an interest for aviation and how that kind of developed?
Yeah, it's a good question. I grew up outside of Portland, Oregon, in a suburb community. I had a great upbringing, amazing parents, older brother. And I would say that aviation bug started for me really young. I'm kind of that story of, as long as I can remember, or as far back as I can remember, I wanted to fly things. And it started with, my neighbor Mackenzie and I would, her parents tell the story as well, and my parents remember it. We built like a wooden airplane in our tree fort area, that we would pretend that we were flying around. And so the aviation bug caught early for me, and started with like RC, did a lot of RC planes as an adolescent, and actually started flying airplanes in high school and was going through all that training. And it wasn't until I ended up doing 1 year of college at Embry-Riddle. And the deal was my parents were like, hey, this school is expensive. Like, you get 1 year. And if you don't get a scholarship, you got to come home and you got to figure something else out. And so I ended up actually getting a scholarship through the ROTC program, but it was under the pretense of a ground commitment, like a ground contract for the military. But they would still pay for all the flight training at Embry-Riddle, pay for the remaining part of school. I think they would even reimburse my freshman year. But I didn't want to have a ground contract, and I think there was even discussion of like, well, it could switch, right? It's all about need. So you sign up now and then you can, try for a flight slot later. And it just felt like a little uncomfortable. So I opted out. Yeah. And so I was kind of like a lost little duckling there for a bit because, I thought I was going to my dream was flying fast movers, in the Navy. That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to fly F-18s. I wanted to land on aircraft carriers. So that was like, Top Gun was constantly playing in my house, and so I was just obsessed with naval aviation. And so I was definitely like a little lost. I'm like, I guess I'm going to go fly the airlines. And I took a demo flight in a helicopter as a birthday present. And I think by the end of the week, I had a student loan out and started flying helicopters. So that's kind of how that all happened.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was the same as you. As a little kid, I had the little Matchbox fighter jets and I was always playing with them. And that was just a dream that I had as a kid. And as a kid, I thought the only way to pursue aviation was to go to the military, and now, having all the conversations that we've had through the podcast, I've realized that almost every single person has a different path and route they took to get to aviation, to either become a pilot or an AMP or whatever the thing is they're doing in aviation. And there's so many different paths to get there. And so I think, one of the side benefits of doing the podcast is exposing those different routes that people can utilize to pursue their dream. Because it's not just military aviation that gets you from point A to point B, and you look at, like you said, all the loans that you've got to take out to get to fly. Like it's unreasonable, for a young kid to take out $60,000 in loans on the low end to fly as a CFI where you're having to work two jobs to make ends meet. That's rough,
It's hard. So, I would say, well, first off, before I get too far into it, one of the cool things is I took that demo flight, somehow ended up into helicopters to a point now where I can say we need to take a quick break for our sponsor, Bell Helicopters, to say a quick word.
Bell is proud to sponsor Vertical Helicasts and their vision to hold meaningful mission, safety, and best practice conversations in the helicopter industry. The lessons learned from these conversations will undoubtedly shape the future of both new and veteran helicopter operators.
So we're back from the break, and again, I've taken over, not hostily, I will say. It's a friendly takeover of the Helicopter Podcast. Yeah, we're talking about the pathways to aviation, and talking about the financial burdens that come with the loans that most people have to take to get into aviation. I know you had experience with that. What are your thoughts on that pathway? And
yeah, it's a good question. I've talked about it. It's been a while, so it's probably good to talk about it again. The loan for me it was necessary. I wasn't able, again, come from a great family, provided me great upbringing, but the idea of spending, $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 on flight training was just not something that my family at that time could do. And so if I wanted to do it, I had no choice. And so for me, it's a necessity, and I'm glad that I had that opportunity. The one thing that I would encourage, and I know that we have a lot of young listeners, is I would encourage you to fully understand the terms of what it means to take on debt. My financial literacy as a 35-year-old adult compared to when I was, 18, 19 years old is night and day. And not understanding exactly what it meant on to take that debt and the responsibility of paying it back to a point where I was unable to pay it back for almost a year. I defaulted on the loan for about the first 12 months, and that racked my credit. I mean, I was like, sub 500 for a long time because of that. So that's frustrating because I just wasn't making enough money. Even doing two jobs, it just wasn't possible. So make sure that you understand, make sure that you're prepared to start paying that debt off. Because for me, I had to work really hard then to get my credit back. Thank God I'm now very high credit score, and it took a long time. If you're in that similar position, do a secure line of credit through your bank. That's a great way to start building credit. That's how I did it. And I look at the monetary amount. It's maybe not uncommon for a stupid 19-year-old to go and buy a $70,000 truck. So I look at it like, okay, look, I spent $70,000, and to this day I'm paying off my debt still because I refinanced it and my rate was so low, it actually just skyrocketed recently. So now I'm in full payoff mode, which is pretty exciting. So that cloud is about to lift. But I look at it like I invested in my future.
Yeah.
So it's a means for some people. The military is a great means to be able to go and do flight training, or do the military and do the GI Bill.
Yeah.
Don't do flight training in the military. Access the GI Bill after and go to a 141 approved school with a college connection and go that route. So, it's the loan is a love-hate. It got me to where I am. I hate the fact that I'm still paying it off this many years later.
Right.
Again, that was a bit of a strategic choice because my rate was so low. So I figured I could put money into other places and have it produce, a better return than just paying off my low rate. But so that's a really long-winded answer, but it's a necessary evil.
For sure. And you bring up this could be a whole conversation by itself, is financial literacy in our youth. Most folks have zero financial literacy coming out of high school. You go to college, and remember on the college campuses, you'd have all the different credit cards that would set a booth up, and they'd give you a free beach towel or something if you signed up for a credit card. And of course, some kids like, yeah, sure, I'll take a beach towel. And then you get $500, on a credit card. I can go buy beer with $500. Like, why not? You just don't know any better. So I really feel like our schools need to invest more time and energy into developing financial literacy. And for me, I've always had kind of a financial mind for some reason. In high school, I became interested through an economics class that was taught, and it wasn't on the tactical, here's how you balance your checkbook or any of that. It was really more the philosophy behind the broader market. And from there, I just developed an interest and kind of pursued that on my own. But I think with outside of some personal interest, there's zero education that talks about that. So.
Yeah, it's hard. And financial literacy is important, and it's something I never took a keen to it. I never thought about it. Right, in high school, they don't really teach about it, and I just got lucky. I don't know what it was, but early on in my young 20s, I was decently mature, but still lacking in a lot of areas. But one of my mature decisions was I started doing a lot of kind of self-education through audiobooks, and stumbled across Dave Ramsey, which again, that could be like a pineapple on pizza conversation. I
love Dave Ramsey.
I would recommend Dave Ramsey to anyone. Yep. You should listen to Dave Ramsey's books. You don't have to do everything that Dave says. And I don't agree on all of his philosophies, but a lot of what I learned from those books helped me rebalance things. And then I listened to a couple of Tony Robbins financial books. That's a doozy. I forget what his first financial book was, but it's like, it's a 20+ hour listen. I don't read books. I listen to books. So that was a doozy, but really educational. And then, of course, the famous Rich Dad, Poor Dad. You can learn a lot from that. So I got lucky, and I've been able to kind of reestablish myself. I rebalanced all of my debt. I have investments in different pools, real estate, market, and other things. And the one actually thing that has been an epiphany for me recently, and I think that this is important for anyone listening, is the best investment that you can make is in yourself. Absolutely. And I decided to invest in myself 3.5 years ago and starting my business at Helicopter. And my return has been so far past any investment that I'll ever make. It's certainly the best investment, but no one teaches you that. I bet you could go to a high school class right now and ask, the kids, or even a college class, hey, tell me investments. What kind of investments are there? and they're going to say real estate. They're going to say the stock market. You can do some hard money lending. You can do this. You can do that. I don't think anyone would say you should invest in yourself. And so investing in yourself is huge. And I think for me, it's been my biggest return.
Yeah, absolutely. I 100% agree with you.
The Helicopter Podcast is now the financial podcast.
I know it's funny when I start talking to people about money, their eyes glaze over and they just don't want to talk about it. So there's very few people that I can talk to it about. So I'm sure.
I think it's fun. I mean, I think it's fun. I mean, to me, like money is like sports, right? Like as a 35-year-old, bald, slightly overweight, kind of lazy guy that can't play sports anymore. Like making money is my sport. Like, running a business is my way of being able to still be competitive.
Yeah.
And the equivalent of a touchdown is making money, and then using that money to help your situation.
Yeah.
I'm actually looking at maybe purchasing a helicopter right now for the sole purpose that A, it would be freaking awesome, and B, it's a great tax benefit for me. So
that's a great spot to be in.
You could use it for your when you start to understand it, you can use it to your benefit. So stay tuned. Yeah. We'll see. Okay. It's very early, but things are working in that direction.
I'm intrigued. You talk about helicopter, and I'd like to dig into that as we go. But before we do that, I'd like to kind of learn about some of the different. You talked about being in aviation. You had a lot of different jobs within aviation. Can you talk about the progression and kind of how that worked for you?
Yeah, certainly. So, I mean, real quickly, I recommend anyone starts working around airplanes or helicopters if you're interested in aviation. So for me, that was line service. You could go to a flight school and be a dispatcher. You could do line service. You could wash airplanes. You could do whatever. So for me, I had jobs at FBOs. I think I worked at 3 different FBOs, line service, and then ultimately also worked line service at Hillsborough Aviation, where I learned how to fly. Also gave me a discount in my training, which was really nice. So I highly recommend that because it's a great way to start learning the world of aviation and seeing it from that perspective. From that very kind of a traditional route, was a CFI, was the assistant chief flight instructor at Hillsborough for a time. Worked my way into being kind of a part-time 135 Jet Ranger pilot for their off-the-ramp charter stuff. Did some Mount St. Helens tours. And then I took a little bit of a detour. And that was when I followed my now wife down to Texas. I didn't have a job, nothing lined up, and ended up parking cars actually for about a year at the Hilton. Figured that I totally made a huge mistake, not by following her, but just leaving a decent career and a good trajectory. And then ended up stumbling upon a gal that had bought a 44 and needed a pilot. And she was using it to fly around the Eagle Ford Shale, which is a big oil play in South Texas, or it was at least at that time. And so I got really lucky. I was flying with her 3 days a week, back in the cockpit, not having to park cars. She got, her husband got really sick, had cancer, and she kind of stopped flying, and she really grew to like me a lot. She's like, hey, look, I can't pay you, right? Like if you're not doing anything, it just doesn't make sense to get paid. And I agreed with that. And so she said, I'm going to essentially give you access to this R44. And if you can make money with it, then you will continue to get paid. And depending on how much money you make with it, then you may even get paid more. And so I started doing 91 operations in her 44. And I did that for a couple years. And that was probably the best. Like you asked, like my least favorite job. That was probably the best job in the fact that it gave me so much confidence that I was capable of so much more than I ever thought I was. Going back to like high school education and financial literacy, I think that our school system teaches to one type of learner. And I was not that type of learner. And because I wasn't that type of learner, I was at times made to feel like I maybe wasn't super intelligent, or I couldn't do a business or have my own business. And so by operating her R44, doing tours and doing it successfully, and grinding at it. I mean, it was a grind, but it was so fun and I learned so much. And it really reignited my entrepreneurial spirit that I always had, but I never thought I could do.
Mm-hmm.
And so I did that for a couple of years. Ultimately, we kind of were able to break even, some profit, but not enough for her to be like wanting to do this anymore. So she told me to sell the helicopter and I sold it. And that was my first experience in selling a helicopter. That was, I don't know, 7+ years ago, probably longer now. And from that, I went to Maverick helicopters, flew in the Grand Canyon, and then it became very traditional again, right? Maverick, then flew air medical, and then decided that I was going to wet my whistle entrepreneurial again and went full-time selling aircraft about 3.5 years ago. I was kind of doing it as a side hustle while doing air medical. So that's my path. It's been an amazing journey, and I feel so fortunate to still be so intertwined within aviation, even though I'm not flying on a daily basis.
It's funny when you look back and those little things, those little moments in your life that completely change the trajectory of where you're going. You talk about that one aircraft sale and look at Helicopter now and what you're doing. And that's amazing.
Look at us now. Yeah.
That's crazy. But going back to, I'd like to talk about Maverick because I
it's
really
super
feel
cool.
Like, what's that? It's Helicopter or Maverick or both?
Oh no. Yeah. Go. Both are cool, but yeah, let's talk about Maverick.
No, I think Maverick's really interesting because it really is kind of a proving grounds for young pilots. There's so many different variables when it comes to weather out there. And you think about, I think the layperson thinks about the Vegas area and it's desert. There's not a lot of clouds, like you said. There's not a lot of precipitation, but you've got a lot of extremes. High temps, low temps, extreme wind shifts. So different terrain that you guys are flying and landing in a lot of remote offsite locations. So I really feel like it's a great place to learn. And then, you progress from there to the HIMS industry and start flying that. And that's kind of where in the Hangar Z podcast, we talk a lot about public safety aviation, and I'd like to dig into that a little bit. But before we do, what was your experience like at Maverick?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. I think that when people think of, flying the ditch, as they would call it, everyone views it very much as like an entry level. Hey, this is a place you get your 1,000 hours piston time. You get a chance flying at, say, a Maverick or a Papillon, or at that time Sundance, no longer around. But those were kind of like the first time, quote unquote, easy jobs. And there's a lot of easiness to that job. A lot of it's the same, flying the same circle, landing in the same spots. But you're exactly right. There's a lot more that goes into it, and there's more technical side of it than just kind of what meets the eye. For me, the wind was a big thing. I had never really flown in turbulence, like consistent turbulence, and man, springtime in Las Vegas, it's 30, 40, 50 knot winds sometimes, and you're flying fairly low to the ground, and you're coming over these you're getting a lot of interference from, the topography of what you're flying over, and man, you get rocked. So that was kind of jarring at times, unsettling, took a little bit to get used to. A lot of dust would get picked up and you would fly in fairly low visibility. And then the heat, we were packing these helicopters full. So they had an STC for an extra seat right next to the pilot. So, I mean, you were fully loaded. And if you were flying a B4, we were flying the 130. You had the B4 and the T2. The B4 has the aerial 2B1. I think it's been a while, so don't quote me, but I think it's a 2B1 versus the T2, which is the 2D1. And the 2D1 is far superior, specifically in hot and heavy. And so, man, you're fully loaded in a B4 on a hot day coming into our fuel farm, especially. You had to really understand how to manage your power.
Yeah.
Not just coming into land, but more importantly, taking off. You were really milking that, using every little bit of airspeed to get into ETL to get you, to where you had to go power wise. So, that was, you definitely cut your teeth and you learn a lot. It's a great time to get experience. And for me, operations like that offer supreme networking. You're working with 70 other pilots, and they're all going to disperse throughout the industry as time goes on, and they're all guys and gals that you stay in touch with. So I would highly recommend Maverick, and that's my experience. There's other tour operators. I love Maverick. I think they pay kind of the best. They have nice equipment. Their maintenance facility is incredible. So I had a great time there, but don't discount it. There's some complexity to flying it. So I'm glad that you asked that.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you in saying it. There's more than meets the eye, and power management, I can't talk. Power management is one of those things that will stick with you for the rest of your career. If you learn it in an environment like that, and it's going to be something that you stick with forever. And that kind of, translates into the HIMSS world, because you guys are flying oftentimes at max capacity there as well. And again, for the Hangar Z podcast, we talk a lot about public safety aviation, HIMSS being a part of that. Our co-host Jeff, he just left the HIMSS industry. He was a HIMSS pilot and went back to law enforcement. But really admire that industry, kind of the idea that you're doing something bigger than yourself, serving folks in their time of need is really cool. When you look at your time in the HIMSS industry, can you think of, a mission that was really impactful? I guess you don't call them missions anymore, they're flight requests, but can you think of a scene that you worked that was really impactful?
Yeah. And I do want to tell you all about that, but first, a word from Celicopter.
As always, a special thanks to Celicopter for producing this podcast. Specializing in helicopter evaluations, faster sales, and superb service, Celicopter is the go-to agency for clients expecting immediate results. Celicopter's team of helicopter professionals are the best in the business. Using their aviation expertise, a nationwide network, and a proprietary 76-step listing strategy, Celicopter will convert your listing from Mayday to payday. Ready to get started? Text helicopter to 1-855-Celicopter. That's helicopter to 1-855-735-5226. And a Celicopter pilot agent will reach out. Celicopter. List it, sell it, done.
Yeah, so it's an interesting question, because I've talked a lot about HIMSS, HA. I think it's now maybe the proper enunciation of it. I've never actually been asked that of like what was impactful. I would say we had an incident that involved a small child that unattended fell into a pool and essentially drowned. 2 or 3 year old, and luckily, by the grace of God, this happened in a very rural area, but we were very close. Call it 5-minute flight, and so we were there very quickly. And luckily, some of the adults that were there that unfortunately had been kind of drinking all day, so that kind of led to that, I think, that outcome. But luckily, some of them knew CPR, and so CPR was administered before the crew got there, and we were able to, our nurse and flight paramedic were able to essentially revive this little guy. The helicopter was shut down. They stabilized this kid. He was still in pretty bad shape. He was breathing and had a heartbeat, but he wasn't really conscious, I guess. And so, taking him, getting him to a higher level of care. I don't actually know what ended up happening, to be honest. It's kind of hard to follow up sometimes, just because of HIPAA and everything like that. You can't really get kind of full details, but it seemed, according to my flight crew, that we were probably in a place where this little guy was going to be probably okay. So, being able to do that, flying a helicopter is like a passion and something I love doing. And so to be able to have that capability of helping someone on their bad day, and my skill helping them do that was, always incredible.
Yeah.
And there was many moments like that. There was many times where, you're flying and it's kind of this weird feeling, like you look next to you, especially in the 407, and, the feet are like right there. And you're like, God, this person's dying, or they're having a heart attack, or they're having a stroke, or they're having a really bad day. And because I took that loan out, and because I stuck with it, and because I chose to deliver pizza and make ends meet. And it got me to this point now to where now I'm flying really cool equipment and I'm helping people.
Yeah. The feet part of it's always funny. I think of a story that Jeff has told quite a few times. He talks about a violent patient they had. I think he had gotten in a fight with law enforcement, some sort of violent confrontation with law enforcement. And he didn't know this at the time. He just knew he had a patient. I guess the med crew sedated the patient in the field, put him in the aircraft and loaded him up to transport him to the hospital. And in flight, Jeff said he noticed his foot twitching a couple times, and it said it kind of had startled him, but not enough. That he didn't know anything about the patient. But afterwards, they offload the patient, and he gets kind of the full brief on what had happened, and if he finds out that it was a violent patient, he's like, man, it's a good thing I didn't know, because I would have screamed like a little girl, if I had known that it was a violent
He's alive.
Patient. So yeah, it's
more propofol now.
It's close quarters, but when you talk about something that's really cool, one of the things I really like about law enforcement, public safety, HIMS, the mission isn't dependent upon one person's skill set alone. It's the skill set that's in every person's skill set that's a part of that team is vital to the successful outcome of whatever that mission is. And
totally.
You don't see that very often. A lot of times it's, whoever the person is, the one person doing the one job is what makes it successful or not. And in this environment, it's not that, so little rabbit hole there, but I just love that part about public safety aviation.
Yeah. And air medical specifically has gotten really good about incorporating, this idea of crew resource management and really working with pilots to make them realize the benefit of having these other two occupants in the helicopter for the overall safety of the aircraft, not just on what they're doing and saving the lives in the back, but when they're not doing that, what else can they be doing to kind of increase the overall safety of the mission? And so, yeah, I think that's, I by and large had great experiences working with crew. It can be hard sometimes. You see these people more than you see your own family.
Yeah.
At times. So, there's maybe some drama here and there, but by and large, yeah, I really enjoyed that aspect of working with that team and all coming together to have a positive outcome.
Yeah. One of the other parts about public safety that I really like is the funny things we see, because the stuff you see, it's so unrealistic. You couldn't even script it if you tried a lot of the times. Can you think of something that happened to you over the course of your career in HIMS where, it could have been with your own crew or maybe a scene call or something that was really funny?
Man, I'm having to dig in the vault a little bit because it's been some time. I think one of my favorite memories is we had a flight nurse. Her name was Hannah. And Hannah was a former Marine. She was a firefighter, and she was all of like 4'8". I mean, she was teeny, but she was like Scrappy Doo. Like, her energy was always at 110%. She was always wanting to work out. And she was a teeny person. She had a little stature, but she'd kick your ass, type of like, you wouldn't want to cross Hannah. But yeah, they're kind of a funny thing, is we landed on I-35, shut it down, which is always kind of a neat experience, as a aeromedical pilot, shutting down a highway. So we shut it down, we land on the highway, and, they carry these big trauma packs, when they get out of the helicopter to go and meet the patient in the ambulance in this point. And there's Hannah walking with this giant trauma pack going down the side of I-35. And she just took a little misstep to the left and it knocked her off balance. And I'm just watching her from the cockpit. I can see it all coming. And she just topples backwards with this big heavy pack. And it's almost like she's like one of those tumble bugs, that can't quite get up, when they're on their back. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So that was kind of a light moment of funniness, and she was fine. She got right back up, and she was a good sport about it. And again, no knock on Hannah, because Hannah could kick my ass, but that trauma pack got the best of her that day.
Yeah, that stuff's great. So I just today found out that you had written an article previously for Vertical. And I want to talk about that a little bit. I didn't know you're a writer, and you actually did a really good job writing that article. But
and
what
that
you
was
wrote
all before ChatGPT.
Yeah. Now, you don't know what's being produced by ChatGPT these days.
No.
But
producer Zach can tell you too. I'm a big fan.
Yeah, I am too. There's all kinds of cool stuff you can do. But you wrote about something that I really have an interest in doing at some point. It's a bucket list thing, is helicopter adventuring. So can you talk about the article? I mean, you got to fly with I Fly Heli guy, who I follow on Instagram, by the way, because he talked about that in your article. But can you talk about what you guys did? And you created kind of the first video podcast as a part of that flight and that adventure. You talk about that and kind of the fun you had there?
Yeah, certainly. So if you're listening and you don't know what John's talking about, I got to do this very awesome experience, probably a couple of years now ago, and it was with York Gallen. He's I Fly Heli is his handle on Instagram, and he's out of Utah, salt of the earth dude, super awesome guy. Comes from kind of an aviation loving family. His brothers all fly helicopters. I think his dad flew airplanes. You know, he loves aviation. And I was fortunate enough to kind of pitch this idea of doing an in helicopter podcast with him. And this was, man, I was maybe 10 episodes in, you know, very early on stages of the podcast. And he was gracious enough to say, yeah, hey, come along. That sounds awesome. And so myself, my buddy Brian Court, and my other friend from Eurotech Canada, Haas Gollenberry, loaded up and we met rendezvoused in Provo, Utah, which, you know, Salt Lake City, Provo, it's incredible. It's gorgeous, you know, right? And so, we got to spend 2 days flying with York and his brothers as well, joined along, and we flew all over southern Utah. We were in, I think, Arizona, all over, including a couple camping spots along the way, kind of in the middle of nowhere. And yeah, it was a moment, an experience that I think people would pay hundreds of thousands of dollars to do. And I was just fortunate enough to get invited along to do it. It was one of those things that really rejuvenated me with just how amazing helicopters were, because we were flying in these environments that were so inaccessible. You know, you could hike there maybe or get there somehow, but it would take lots of endurance and strength and planning and logistics. Whereas, you know, in the helicopter, boom, you know, we're there, you know, and we're right there flying along the wall and landing on this spot and landing down in this area here. We landed on some mountain peak. I don't think I'm supposed to say the name, so I'm not going to, but we landed on this mountain area, and the area in which we landed, I bet you like no one, like very limited people have probably ever set foot where we were. And it was just it was almost like this natural amphitheater of rocks, and then pillars with big rocks on top, then to like this sheer 2,000 foot drop. I mean, this just incredible stuff. So it was just such an amazing, fun experience. York is an awesome guy. Helicopter camping, totally recommend it. If I end up buying my own aircraft, one of the big reasons I want to do that is, you know, living in Central Oregon, I feel like I can maybe kind of recreate that experience on a more regular basis.
I'll be knocking on your door.
Come on up.
We'll do a dual podcast. But no, you wrote something in the article that was really interesting. You basically contrasted the simplicity of camping and compared it or contrasted it to the complex machine that you're camping next to. And I thought it was really an interesting way to look at it, because it's true. You know, camping is, you know, a simplistic adventure that you take outside, and you know, it gets you away from all the busyness of life and forces you to have conversations with the person you're sitting next to, which is great, you know?
Yeah. There was a really kind of a paradox, if that's the right word, but it was kind of like this. Here we are in the most natural place. I mean, we're camping in the middle of absolute nowhere, created by God, in my opinion, right? Like, just amazing spot. And we were taken there by something that is really unnatural, a helicopter. You know, it's like, there's just like this interesting contrast of where we were and how we got there and how they kind of melded together. And writing that article was so fun. I never thought in my, I actually grew up with an IEP, which is an individual education plan, because I was slow. I was not a great reader and not a great writer. And so never in my wildest dreams did I think I would be a published, contributor to a big publication like that. And so writing that story to me was like incredible, and so much fun. And that was my first interaction with MHM. That's when I first started kind of talking with Mike Reno, Oliver, the editor on the vertical side. So yeah, that was kind of when I think all of this whole, maybe there's something to this podcast thing kind of took birth. So pretty exciting and an amazing experience. I really appreciate that you read the article and I appreciate your kind words on it.
Yeah, it was really good. Like you said, you start in these early days and you just have you can't even fathom where life's going to take you and the opportunities you're going to have. And then, you look at yourself, and all of a sudden you're writing an article for the pinnacle of aviation, in terms of publications. That's wild, and then, now we're part of Vertical Helicast collectively and the stuff we're doing there is amazing. And really just been, like you said, really cool to work with Mike, and Linda and Derek and the whole team at Vertical. They're doing a fantastic job of, again, producing the pinnacle publication for the rotorcraft industry and aviation in general. It's been awesome. Looking at your own podcast and kind of where you'd like to see your podcast go as we move forward, where do you see the helicopter podcast, a year from now or so?
Yeah. I think we're right at the precipice, right? I feel like, what we've done so far to get to 50 has been good. Hasn't always been pretty, but we've done good. And there's been a lot of changes. I started with video, then didn't do video, and now I'm doing video again. I've invested quite a bit of time, energy, and some money into having a nicer studio and a nicer setup. So I think that's been really big and built a nice, strong foundation. Whereas maybe episode 10 would have been a hard time for me to take on a collaboration like Vertical Helicasts. So I think I've built a nice foundation, and now with the propellant and the power of MHM, I think it's only going to take, no pun intended, this podcast to greater heights. We're going to be able to do so many fun collaboration, not just with our other podcasters like yourself, but working directly with Oliver, the editor at Vertical, and applying my podcast into the articles that Vertical is writing, whether that's with operators, owners, OEMs, whatever it may be. It's going to be like this opportunity to give these articles a little bit more life by having now an extension of a podcast that's incorporated with these stories that Vertical is putting out. So I'm really excited about that. The most unexpected thing on the podcast for me is just all the relationships and the friendships and the networking that have come from this. So I get so many cool opportunities. I mean, you and I were going to go to MD this week. Unfortunately, that event had to get postponed, but that was an event that we were going to go and do some really cool things, all made possible because of the podcast. Talking with guys like David, at Robinson Helicopters. Incredible to be able to talk to these higher up decision makers in these big companies. It gives me access to people that I usually wouldn't be able to access. Yeah. And so I think that's where the podcast is going. It's just going to keep telling the story of the men and women that make this industry interesting, the men and women that make this industry work, and their stories on how they got there, whether it's Ben Clayton from Life Flight Network, line pilot to CEO, or it's, we had a great guest, Christine, on the other day from, working a good engineering job to quitting everything to now being a captain in a Chinook at Columbia. I love hearing these stories. And that's what I want to continue to do is I want to hear the stories of the people that make this industry awesome. And I'm just a lucky guy that gets to do it. Like I just, I pinch myself that I have the opportunity to talk with these people. So that's where the podcast is going, John. I'm super excited. Yeah. And I do know, we keep our podcast here to an hour, John. So we're almost there. We're at 59 minutes and 15 seconds. But before we go, we can extend because I want to make sure that my listeners know a little bit about you and what you've done at the Hangar Z podcast. So I want to steal back my podcast for a second, put my host hat back on. and put you back in the hot seat. If you wouldn't mind just giving my listeners a little bit of a glimpse of who you are, what the Hangar Z podcast is, and what they can expect when they check out your podcast.
Yeah, for sure. I was fortunate enough to spend most of my life in public safety. I started as a firefighter and spent 18 years afterwards in law enforcement. Had the opportunity to become a pilot, a tactical flight officer, and then a pilot at a Ontario Police Department in Southern California. So flying as a police pilot in Southern California was really awesome. Definitely the highlight of my professional career in public safety. My passion, like I said, started as a young kid. So to be able to accomplish my dream of being a pilot and finish my career out in that way was really cool. In 2020, I think a lot of us were looking for hobbies, and I was a big consumer of podcasts. So I found a niche that was not being filled in public safety aviation. I'm like, you know what? There's no podcasts actually that were covering the public safety segment. So I'm like, hey, I'll try it, and I honestly didn't think it would be more than a couple episodes, and it'd be my mom and maybe one of her friends listening and say, nice job, honey. Good,
Thanks, Mom.
But it's taken off. It's been really fun. Like you said, every time we talk to someone new, it's a new friend that joins the Hangar Z family. And in the Hangar Z podcast, we cover the personnel and equipment behind the missions of public safety aviation. That's kind of our official tagline. But there's so many different jobs that are being completed to make each mission successful. I didn't want to just focus on the pilot or the TFO. I wanted to focus on kind of everybody who's doing the jobs in our industry to make each mission successful. So that's kind of what we focus on. And from time to time, we'll do some podcast interviews with folks that aren't in public safety aviation, just in the aviation community in general. And even we just had a really good conversation with Jimmy Hatch. He was a Navy SEAL. He wrote a book called Touching the Dragon, and he talks about what he went through. It's a story and conversation on PTSD, and that was a really good conversation. And that wasn't even he touched aviation, being in the military and a SEAL. He did fly quite a bit to the missions they were going to, but he wasn't a pilot. He wasn't actually a part of the flight crew. So that's just kind of an example of some of the diversity of stories we bring. But for the sake of time, that's kind of what we are at the Hangar Z podcast. So thanks for giving me the opportunity to pitch that. And I truly appreciate that.
No, it's so cool. And how many episodes are you at now?
We're just going to release 109. So 109 episodes.
That's incredible. Podcasting is so fun and there's so much reward to it, but it comes with a lot of work.
Yeah.
And a lot of the work early on is volunteer paid work. It takes a while to be successful. You have to have that consistency. And so to hit 109 episodes, I mean, congratulations to you. I remember at Heli Expo and talking with Mike at MHM, and he was, talking very highly of the Hangar Z podcast. At first I was like, oh man, I gotta step up my game. Like this Hangar Z guy, and I started listening and I'm like, I really got to step up my game. Like, if I'm going to be incorporated, on this platform with podcasters like Jon and Jason Quinn, I need to step it up. So that's when I got to, start to throw a little bit more energy at it. So, I thank you for elevating my podcast because, I think that you have set a very high bar for podcasting within this space. And I think it's super fun to be able to work with you and collaborate with you. I appreciate you being here to celebrate the big 5-0 for the Helicopter podcast.
Congrats.
And so if you're not familiar with Vertical Helicast, please go check it out. It's essentially a platform with right now 3 podcasts. I'm thinking that there will be more to come. It's the Hangar Z podcast with Jon, of course. The Real Rescue with Jason Quinn, aka Quinny. Quinny is nuts, like in the most awesome way. Like that guy is full of piss and vinegar.
He's salt of the earth. Like you brought that up earlier. He's got the most energy that I've ever seen somebody possess, but it's all positive energy. I love it.
Yeah. I feel like I roll out. My comment to Jason was, I roll out of bed. I bet you he like jumps out of bed and is doing one-handed push-ups. But what a cool dude, and what great stories that he brings on the Real Rescue. Yeah. And, being a rescue swimmer himself, number 500, which I think is also kind of really neat just to have that number be your number. So the Vertical Helicast touches every little bit of this helicopter industry that we're in. So I really encourage you, if you like listening to the helicopter podcasts, then you got to go and check out these other podcasts because they're super interesting. And at the end of the day, guys, engagement allows us to keep growing. So the more that you guys engage with us, the more and better content that we can put out. The more funds that will get pushed into this through engagement allow us to do really, really cool things. So it's a shameless plug, but this is how the world works, and this is how we're doing it here. And so we're just grateful for you guys and the engagement that you've given us. Keep doing it, and make sure that you like, subscribe, and follow along. Again, thanks for hijacking the podcast today, John.
Yeah, that was fun.
And you said my last name right, so that was great. Appreciate that.
Yeah, the first time we recorded together, I mispronounced your name, and I'll never do it again. I promise that.
It's okay. Hey, it's it happens. It's a weird last name. It should be Schider. Why is it not Schneider? I have no idea. Why is it Schider? I don't get it. Anyway, thank you for listening to the Helicopter Podcast, and big shout out to Jon Gray from the Hangar Z Podcast. Please go check it out. Take care.